What's good, DWA fam? This is Jared. Don't forget to leave a review, rating, or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Hope you enjoy this episode.
Hey y'all, and if you're new here, welcome to the family. My name is Asia.
My name is Jared, and thank you for listening to
Done with Adulting Podcast. We are really glad you're here because we're talking all things we have to do as adults that no one warned us about during the many years we were in school.
Yes, we also discuss pop culture, current events, and give our perspective on hot topic issues in our society. And even though we're best friends, we don't always agree.
Basically, we're millennials. We get it. Adulting is hard. Welcome to your safe space.
We hope you enjoy.
Now, for today's episode, I am so excited to have this Dead Dad Roundtable baby with my friends Asia and Jared of Done with Adulting. They have a weekly pod providing you relief that you need from life's biggest pressure. They are Boston-based besties. They don't say it like that, but I think that's really cute. Actually, wait, no, they say Boston-based best friends. I like to say Boston-based besties, and they break down societal expectations of adulting, and they have a really good show. So definitely check them out. I had released previously they had interviewed me, and I'd released that episode previously. So we had actually recently met at that time, and then I found out mid-interview that both of their dads had died, which I didn't know, which is always an awkward thing to find out mid-interview. Not because it's awkward, but just because you guys know I'm so passionate about talking about grief. When I just find out in the middle of doing something else, I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, halt everything. We have to discuss. And we kind of did then, but now we fully are now. So Asia lost her dad at 19, which is how old I was. She lost her dad to sarcoidosis, a disease characterized by the growth of tiny collections of inflammatory cells. Yes, that is me reading it offline. And she talks about how many people do live with this, and her dad did not, and the frustrations surrounding that, and also the trials and tribulations of grief during college, which I totally related to. Hardcore, and some beautiful stuff, how she looks like her dad and people still recognize her on the street and are like, oh my gosh, are you Bill's daughter? And I think that's so cute and magical. And Jared lost his dad last year in September to kidney failure. Didn't drink or smoke, and I'm sure there's people listening if your parent did die from drinking and smoking, that is also valid, and we are here to talk about that too. And he lost his dad last September, which is of course quite recent. He is also gearing up to be a dad himself. He is expecting with his wife, so we talk about how fatherhood is affected and by the loss of your dad and the anticipatory grief that he had the last few years. So we're jumping into both of their stories. I think it's cool that they are kind of hearing each other's stories, not for the first time, but I think with Jared, more specifically, opening it up is, because it's more recent, maybe hasn't been talked about as much. So I really appreciated both of them being here. We met in the Almost 30 podcast community last year, and we're homies now. And it's just so cool how you can meet people online. So thanks for joining us for this discussion. If you have a dead dad, what's up? See you, I hear you, I feel you. Actually, I do none of those things because I'm alone in my room. But you know what I mean. If you would like to share the story of your dead dad, of course, hit me up on Instagram at Dying of Laughter Podcast. I would love to hear your story, hear your dad's name. I'm here to support you and listen. So don't be afraid to shoot me a DM. That's what we do here. And if you like this episode, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts is extremely appreciated. It means so much to me. Thank you again, Asia and Jared. Let's jump into the interview, and I will talk to you guys next week. Bye. I am so excited to have you both here today. We have Jared and Asia from Done with Adulting. I did their podcast a few months ago. No big deal. Thank you guys so much for being here.
No, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's so exciting.
Absolutely. It's so exciting. We met in the Almost 30 Podcast Accelerator program, and now we're friends IRL, but IRL means online because I feel like we're actual friends, but we've never actually met. What does this mean? Please tell me. Thank you, Zoom, for being the catalyst for these experiences. I feel like I know you guys a little bit more. I feel like we'll maybe meet up in person somehow later this year. I don't know why, but do you feel that?
Hey, come to Boston, or if we go to California, we'll hit you up.
I'm going to be in California in September, so
Ooh.
the potential is real.
Oh my goodness. What are you doing in Cali?
Well, it's not a surprise anymore, but I was trying to surprise my husband for his 30th birthday, and he knows now. But we're just going for his birthday. His best friend lives in Hawaii, actually, and they never see each other. So it's kind of halfway, weirdly. And we're just going with some family and going to have like Labor Day weekend in LA. He's never been to
Oh,
LA
you're
before.
going to LA? I was going to ask what part.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, no pressure. I know also sometimes these trips are like so short, and then anyone you've ever met from that city is like, let's meet up. And you're like, I have 2 dinners left and you're not like in the top 2, sorry. But would love to be a backup option if it becomes available.
Got you.
I'm going to be jealous. I'm going to still be in Boston, just watching
I
them have
wanted
fun in
to
LA.
invite Jared. Yeah, but he's going to be on fatherhood duties. So
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up. Let's jump right in. Huge congrats, Jared. You and your wife are expecting.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that? How are you feeling? That's incredibly exciting.
I'm good. Yeah, she's due August 7th, and we're going to be having a little girl. So it's exciting, it's scary. Don't know what to expect or what's to come, but we're excited and we're ready for it. So just trying to get everything ready before then.
I have friends expecting as well, and it's so fun to hear about their journeys. What was that like for you when you guys first found out? Like, what has been your journey? Were you trying? Was it a surprise, if you care to share? And how are you feeling?
Well, yeah. So I thought we were trying. She said that we really weren't trying, but I don't know how that was the case. I think that she didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but we thought there might be some like complications for like the first few tries or whatever, but it actually happened pretty quickly. She told me, and we were just like, wow. Like what, like, okay, I guess this is real. I guess we're about to really start adulting like fully. But it's been kind of weird in COVID because I guess usually she would have appointments like every single month or every 2 weeks, but her appointments have been kind of spread out due to COVID. And unfortunately, I haven't actually been able to go in there with her to see any of like the ultrasounds or just like meet any of the doctors or anything like that. So I've been kind of removed from the process, which kind of sucks. So I don't think it really will hit me until she's like legit pushing the baby out and I'm seeing it with my own 2 eyes. But we shall see.
Thank you for sharing that about COVID. That's such a good reminder that things are still not 100% the way that they were. I'm sorry that you're having that. I hope that you can go in soon and meet doctors once that's safe. I wonder maybe by the summer if that will be a thing. I hope so.
Yeah, so I mean, Massachusetts is starting to open up fully, but even with that, I think hospitals are still keeping certain type of protocols just to be safe. But there's a company around us that actually does like 3D and 4D ultrasounds. You just have to pay to go there, and I'm actually allowed in. So we're gonna try to do that experience. So just so like I have the ability to actually be there and see the ultrasound and hear the heartbeat for myself. I had a friend from one of my gyms who actually his wife is due the day after us, and he actually went and did it. And he was like, it was the best experience of his life. So they gave me the information. I was like, yeah, we definitely gotta check this out.
That is incredible. I cannot wait to stay tuned and see all the cutest pictures ever. Not to like rush to that moment, but like I love a 2-year-old photo moment, like chocolate on the face, the whole situation. Huge congratulations. I feel like now this podcast is going to just be me talking to you all about that. And Asia's going to be like, I'm
I here?
also here.
Yeah.
What's happening? So one question I ask everyone to start off these interviews is about your goldfish moment. And for those who don't know, a goldfish moment is the first time you thought about or conceptualized death in some way. For some people, it was their goldfish. Do you have a memory in childhood that comes to mind? Goldfish moment. Did your goldfish die? Goldfish moment. Did it make you cry?
I do. I have like a vivid one. And it was when my dad's mother passed away. So my paternal grandmother. And I was maybe 10 or 11. And what I remember about it is like that was the first time I saw my dad like break down. Like when we were like, she was in the hospital. We were on our way out the door to go see her and visit her, which like we knew maybe it would be the last time. And right before we left, we got the call and he was like at the top of the stairs and kind of like just literally physically broke down. And like by the time it was over, we were all at the bottom of the stairs. It was like a very vivid memory in my mind of me being like, whoa, like I've never seen my family like react like this to anything before. So I guess that's my goldfish moment because that's like my first memory of having, and that was my first grandparent at the time that had passed away. My only other grandparent that had passed away died before I was born. So that was kind of, I think, the first big one for me.
Thank you for sharing that. The image of a parent breaking down about their own parent is relatable. I have that experience as well, and it's so heartbreaking, right? And yet there's some comfort in knowing that your parent having that experience shows how close they were, which is beautiful in a sad way. So thank you for sharing. What about you, Jared?
It's a great question. So I think I might have been. It's going to go a little dark, maybe.
That is fair. Fair game here.
I think I was very young. I was like maybe 3, 4, or 5, and I just remember like growing up like in the church. My grandparents very religious, and they're just always talking about heaven, and obviously the opposite. So I'm just like heaven. Like they always say, heaven is this great place. That's the goal of life is to make it to heaven. And I'm being at a young age, just keep hearing this over and over. I'm like, well, I want to go to heaven. Like, how do we get to heaven? And they're like, you gotta die. So I remember asking my great grandmother, I was like, Grandma, if I'd kill myself, will I go to heaven? And she basically told me no. And I was like, oh, okay, well, obviously then I don't want to do that. But like that was like my first like conceptualization of, I guess, death and just thinking about what happens after death. It's kind of weird, but little dark. I don't know. And I was so young.
I'm sorry that I laugh. I'm not laughing at what you're saying. I'm just laughing
Oh,
at
I'm
like
laughing
the
myself.
innocence.
So no worries.
I'm laughing because I feel like whenever we go on other podcasts, which is so much fun for us, I always learn 15 new things about Jared that I've never heard, even though we have a podcast together. So this is like my
Because like why would I bring that up randomly? And it's not like it's not like I was suicidal or anything. It was just like, hey, like they keep saying heaven is a magical place. Like I want to go to heaven. How do I get to heaven? It's like death. Really? I mean, I don't know.
Oh my God, little innocent heaven cutie. Maybe that's not what we should say. But hey, thank you for sharing your stories. I love hearing them. They're always so unique and interesting. And I feel like, yeah, in childhood, we're going to conceptualize death at some point, whether it's 3, 7, 10, somewhere in there. So,
well, so what about yourself? What about your fishbowl moment? Or like, do all of your listeners know this already?
oh my goodness. I don't think I've ever been asked that. See, it's the podcast host in you. I won't go too down. Mine was when I was 4. Do you know this relationship when your parents have a cousin and it's their child?
Yes, I have 1,000 of those.
What is that? Is that called your cousin once removed or your second cousin?
I think it's something removed, but I'm not totally sure. But I call them second cousins, but I know for a fact that's wrong.
Yeah, I'd call them cousins, but I don't really actually think they are. But
fair.
Everybody's a cousin.
Yeah, when I was 4, my second cousin, who was 9, actually died in an accident on a field trip.
Actually, I think I remember you telling us this.
Yeah, you did tell us that.
Yeah. And it is really sad. I mean, it's really uncomfortable even for me to say that now. And I think it's important to normalize tragedy, like especially with children, people don't want to talk about it. And it's horrible that happened, and they were in the snow, and she walked over a patch of ice and fell in. There were chaperones. They just didn't catch her in time. And, her parents have had a beautiful experience experiencing Buddhism and, doing all these wonderful reflective things that I don't know. They're such incredible people to talk to with their perspective. It was their only daughter. And yet I also think things like that are part of why I became interested in all of this, of just being that young and hearing about her. You know, I knew her. I looked up to her. Like, we played dolls together, you know? So we are here honoring your dads today. This is like somehow a mini dead dad round table because we all have lost our dads. Asia just raised her hand.
Yeah, I'm like raising the roof. Dead dad club. So not cool thing to say, but it's real.
Well, Father's Day is coming around the corner, right?
Yes, let's definitely address that as well. I would love to hear each of your stories surrounding grief. I appreciate your honesty here. And I would love to hear a little bit more about your timeline. So if you could each share who you grew up with, where you grew up, and walk us through the timeline from childhood through the loss of your dad. Does anyone feel inspired to start?
So I grew up in a small suburbia in Massachusetts, 30 miles outside of Boston, with both my parents, younger brother. I have an older sister, but we don't have the same mom. So she was kind of with us like during summers only. And yeah, I mean, I had a good life, my parents worked really hard to give us, you know, a privileged life, and it was all well and good. Daisies and roses. Both sides of my family are huge, so lots of family events. And our house has kind of always been like the hub of those family events. To be totally honest, for both my mom and my dad's side of the family, this house that they bought as like my childhood home was kind of one of the bigger accomplishments and bigger homes that anyone in my family had ever bought before. So, you know, we had a pool, we have a huge yard. And so this really became like the communal place for everybody, all my cousins, aunts, and uncles. So then when I was in high school, my dad's lung collapsed. I remember I was going to get on the bus. It was like the morning, and I was like walking by the living room to leave the house to go get on the bus. And he was like talking to me to try to tell me something. And then as he was talking, he like couldn't really breathe. And he was like, I think something's wrong. So I was actually the one that called 911 that morning because my mom would leave at like 6 a.m. to go to work because she had a long commute. So it was just me, I guess, and my dad. This is so weird because I haven't told this story. So now I'm trying to like remember. But anyways, the other backside of the story is I played basketball my whole high school and college career. My dad played basketball in high school and college. So that was like our thing out of all of his three kids. Like I was the only basketball player. So he was like vicariously reliving his career through me. So anyways, his lung collapsed, but he, like I said, he was a basketball player. So he was like pretty healthy, in great shape. He was like maybe 45 when this was going on. So that happened. And that's when we kind of first realized he was sick with a disease called sarcoidosis, but people call it sarcoids. It's very like, it's kind of common, like with people who, if you have asthma, or essentially, I think like the non-doctor way to explain it is like, essentially makes like these little tiny minuscule holes in your lung. And then like, if you don't treat it and there's too many, like eventually your lungs will collapse. But it's like a chronic disease. Many people live a very long life with it. So we weren't like panicked at first. We were just like, okay. And two of his siblings had it. So we were like familiar with it. And the other thing that's happening at the same time is like my parents are going through a little bit of like a separation, not a little bit. It was an actual separation that ended up being a divorce. But at the time, to me as a high schooler, I was like, this is temporary. So I go to college and he's getting progressively worse. Like by the time I go to school, you know, freshman year, he's using an oxygen tank 24/7. I picked a school. Jared and I went to the same college. And one of the reasons I picked this school was because it was like nearby to where he lived. And I know he wanted to see my games. So it just worked out, the universe, because I was able to go on a scholarship. So that was all like kind of like,
congratulations.
Thank you. That felt very like, okay, this is good. Like, but still at this point, there's no thought in my mind like that this is going to end in death. Like everything is I'm only 18. So everything is very high level. No one's really giving me the full story. But at this point, he was on the transplant list and he needed a double lung and a heart transplant, which is like a very hard combination of organs to find. And so by the time I was in college, he was like on the transplant list. And the message the whole time from him was like, oh yeah, I'm going to get this transplant and then we'll be good. Like it was very positive, like no brainer. This transplant was coming. So like, that's what I thought too. So then sophomore year, things were getting like a lot worse. And I remember in December of the school year, it's like in the middle of basketball season, obviously, he had a stroke, which was the first time that ever happened. And I was like, got suspicious that people weren't telling me the full story of what was going on. So there was like a lot of anger and stuff around that at the time. But even, after he recovered from the stroke, I talked to him and he was like, it's fine. Like, I'm fine. Like, he just wanted me to focus on the season. Like, that's all he cared about. He was like asking me about practice, asking me about games. But also, my college experience was a little different just because I was like, after practice, bringing him medicine and like going to bring him to appointments and like doing things that maybe a normal college student wouldn't have to do. So then the night that my dad actually passed away, it was the night before a game. It was February of 2012. And it was the night before a playoff game at that. And he had like texted me 2 days before and was like, I'm in the hospital. I wasn't feeling well. Don't panic. Like, focus on the game this week. Everything's fine. Like, come see me on Saturday or something. The game was like either on a Thursday or Friday. I can't really remember. I think it was a Thursday. So I'm like, are you sure you don't need me to come to the hospital? He's like, no, I'm fine. Like, don't get distracted. Literally, this is what this man is saying. And so I go, and like the night before the game, his girlfriend at the time, which was like a whole nother, if we went into that story, we'd be here for 7 hours. But his girlfriend at the time, my parents had only been divorced for like a year. Their divorce was finalized freshman year. So now that's like a thing that I'm going through, and he's sick and it's just like, whatever. So his girlfriend at the time texted me at midnight and she was like, I think you should come. They have to like intubate him, which he wrote, I guess, on a piece of paper that if they have to intubate him to like call his kids. So she was like, I think you should come. So I'm like, okay. So I get up in the middle of the night with my roommate at the time, my boyfriend at the time. It's like wild to even think about. And I go to the hospital. I pack up, go to the hospital. It's 1 a.m. We're all sleeping in the waiting room. We're in ICU. There's no one in there except for us. My sister, my older sister, I'm 19, so she's 29 at the time, like should be the one making decisions, lives in Baltimore. So she's like at the airport trying to get a flight. And it's like me, my roommate, my ex-boyfriend, my uncle, and my dad's girlfriend, which literally like 50% of those people I don't talk to anymore. Actually 60%. So that's like a weird thing to think about. But the doctor comes in and he's like, we need to make some decisions. And my dad's girlfriend is like, we are not making any decisions until his oldest daughter gets here. And the doctor's like, well, when is that? And she was like, her flight lands at 8 a.m. And he's like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. Like we have way less time than that. So that was kind of the moment that I was like, wait, what are you saying? And like, I'm just like, it feels like when I recall it, it feels a little bit like a dream, but like, I know it was real. But when I recall it in my head, maybe because I've dreamt about it a lot of times. But anyways, the thing that I hated about that experience, to be honest with you, wasn't even like in my most vivid memory, wasn't even like saying goodbye. It was like, we're in the room saying goodbye, everybody. And the hospital sent like a social worker or like a grief person over to like pray with us. And it was like the most awkward thing ever. Like I remember being like, can this lady just like leave? But no one knew how to tell her to leave. Like she was like, didn't really speak good English. And it was just like, I don't know why that's such a vivid memory. I was like really pissed off at that lady for no reason. She was just trying to help. She was very nice. So anyways, that night he ends up passing away. My brother is 11 and he lives in my mom's house. So he's like in bed, literally. So I was like the only one of his kids who saw him right before he passed away, like in the hospital, which is something that I've had resentment about, like having that memory. No one else has that like visual, of like, cause at that point he didn't really look like himself. It was kind of like, this is not real life. And then I went back to my dorm. By the time I get back to my dorm, it's like 7 a.m. And my sister lands, picks me up from my dorm. I don't play in the game. We obviously lose. It's like, which I regretted. I was like, I should have just played. Like, he would have wanted me to play. That was like a whole thing I went through, but I couldn't play. I was so dehydrated. I was been crying for like 24 hours. So I would have passed out probably if I played. Yeah. The last 2 years I tried to quit. It didn't work. Like, everybody stopped me. And I ended up playing the final 2 years, and that happened when I was 19, and a whole bunch of other stuff happened in college. Like, just a lot of managing grief and being with a person who I was only with because I didn't think I could be with anyone who didn't meet my dad. And that person was like not a good person to me at the time. So there was like a lot of aftermath in college that I feel like I went through that I was just ignoring because like no one in college was losing their parents. So it wasn't really like a place where you could be like, this is the thing that I'm like, people would understand. Do you know what I mean? So it was a lot of suppression, and to be honest with you, like, it is only in the last maybe, I would say like 3 years of my life that I have like really started dealing with everything. And there's still so much to deal with. There's a lot of stuff that my mom and I go through because of it. And there's a lot of drama at like, because they just got divorced, and the way that the funeral, she wasn't, and it was just like, there was so much and so many factors that I'm just now kind of like getting around to dealing with emotionally. And I think it's because like I'm married now. So I went through that without him. And then I'm doing all these business entrepreneurs that I think he would think is cool. So I feel like, I don't know, or maybe it's my Saturn return. You know me, I'm like into stars. But I feel like this is like the first time in my life where I've like talked about him a lot and like thought about him a lot. And like, whereas like that kind of happened the first 2 years. And then there was like a 5-year period where I lived in DC and I was like distracted. And now I'm like back home in my childhood house and like, you know, memories and shit.
I didn't know you were going to try to quit basketball.
What? I went right up to the office. I like, because what I was literally like, my dad died and then I was voted captain like a month later, which was like, why? This girl can't even not cry for 2 seconds. And we had this workout and it was supposed to run like 3 miles around the school. And halfway, I just was like broke down emotionally. So, and I was like in the back of the thing already. Like I wasn't trying. I was just like, and I stopped. I just walked the whole way. And by the time I got back to the finish line, the whole team was already gone. It was just like, my coach is there. Like, what is wrong? Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm not doing, like, I quit. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. And one of my coaches had to like take me out for ice cream and like talk me off the ledge. And then my mom was like, well, I can't afford that school if you're not going to play. So the choice is yours. And yeah.
Choice was made right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The choice was made. Thank you so much, Asia, for sharing your story and walking us through the timeline. And I appreciate getting to hear more about it. And yeah, I feel, even though it's a completely different story, I feel a connection having also been 19. So we both lost our dads in college, and thank you. So this is going to certainly help people who also haven't processed things until the last few years. I think that's very common. You know, your early 20s, you're like, okay, let's move on. Like that was a thing. And I don't think we realize how big of an event it is until you get into your late 20s. Sounds like you and I had similar revelations there. Jared, I wanted to ask before we go into your grief story, did you have a question for Asia about what she went through, since you guys are friends? And since we're here, I wanted to give you the floor. And if not, that's also okay.
I don't think I do. I mean, yeah, or go ahead.
I was going to say, you were there, right? You came to the services in that church,
I came to the
and
services.
It was like packed.
Yeah, it was a huge church, and it seemed like there were 1 million people there.
Literally.
But no, I was there when he passed. I knew Asia. We were in school together. Yeah, so I really don't have, I mean, I've heard her story multiple times. I didn't know that your parents divorced in high school. I thought it was a little earlier than that.
No, they separated going into my senior year of high school. Like, literally, it's so funny because I just accepted my scholarship, like just hung up the phone saying like, I will accept this full scholarship for school. So like, very happy moment.
And then you turn around.
Literally, in like, it was the same week that we were having a family reunion. So all my family was coming in town for the family reunion. And they were like, my parents were like, that's really good. Also, my dad was like, I'm not going to be at the family reunion stuff because like I'm moving out. And I was like, wait, what is going on? What is happening right now?
Wow.
And so that was like going into senior year of high school. So senior year of high school, my dad didn't live here. Everything was finalized by freshman year of college, and then he passed like sophomore year. So it was literally like everything at once that I was still processing. So yeah, that was like a really wild thing too, because I was like, okay, this guy is sick. And obviously there's stuff like my mom and I have to work through. She'll never listen to this, so I don't care. But there's obviously like things that I knew about. There was fault on both sides at per usual, but I just think like there's definitely resentment that my mom and I have or hold maybe about just, yeah, like I feel like sometimes I was absorbing my mom's emotions about the divorce. So when I would go to see my dad, I was projecting that and being like a huge bitch for like the last year of his life.
Yo, I was as you were talking, I was gonna text you on the side and be like, we should talk about divorce on the pod. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry,
Yes.
like it's just so much that you can just go into. And I think it's a great
Well,
topic.
yeah. So I was like, I feel like I was mean to him for the past last year of his life because I was absorbing things from my mom,
And
not from
projecting that,
him.
yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't live there. So that is like something I carry every fucking day. And I just need to probably talk to my mom about it, which I've tried, and it ends in like screaming and crying. So we're not ready yet. But yeah, that's like another thing I'm going through that I feel like I'm just now addressing in my late 20s. So
So I guess that kind of does go into my story a little bit. I mean, my timeline is not going to be as long as hers. So sorry, just a little pre-warning. But
No,
yeah,
apples and oranges. Thank you for sharing your story.
yeah. My parents, I mean, they were divorced ever since I remember. I think they might have got divorced at like when I was 2, maybe. I don't know if that's even right. But ever since I remember like life, they've been divorced. But it's kind of funny though, because like the way that I see divorce, I feel like it's different than other people because even through divorce, like their relationship was still so close and so tight. And even as I got older, like there would be times when I would call my mom or I'll call my dad and they'd be like, oh, did you talk to your mom? Did you talk to your dad? And I'm like, oh, I just got off the phone with them. And I'm like, they're talking to each other more than I'm talking to either one of them. So it was just like their funny dynamic. But yeah, growing up, I'm originally from Southern New Jersey. Grew up in a single mother household. I mean, my dad was always there and always around. I usually saw him on weekends. So he ended up dying from kidney failure. I knew that he had a kidney issue around high school. I don't know if it was freshman or sophomore year, but yeah, he told me that he was sick and he would be just going through a dialysis and eventually in life he would need a kidney transplant. But he never drank, never smoked. To me, he was always like perfectly healthy. He never did any like bad drugs or anything like that that would, I guess, accelerate your or decelerate your life or your health. So it's kind of just weird how all of a sudden he just randomly got sick. So high school, he's just going through dialysis, things like that. He seems perfectly fine to me. I started going to college. Now I'm up in Boston area, Massachusetts. He travels into my games every now and then, but you can start seeing his like health deteriorate a little bit. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, dialysis takes a lot out of you. You're all basically hooked up to a machine for like 2 to 4 hours, and it's just pumping medicine into you. So after that, I mean, you basically look like a zombie. You're sluggish and tired. Um, After college, graduate, I'm still up in Massachusetts working. We're still close, still having great conversations and talking. He comes up every now and then. Every time I go home, I'm staying with him because at this point my mom retired down to Georgia. So every time I'm back home in Jersey, I'm staying with him, obviously. So yeah, just living life and just making, I mean, just having that, I guess, normal father son relationship. As we progress into 2020, his health is deteriorating a little bit more. There are times when I guess he forgets to go to dialysis, which hurts him tremendously. So he has to get like rushed to the hospital. So within the past, I guess 3 to 4 years of his life, there's been times when I actually thought he was going to die. So I kind of like already prepped myself for that, like for his death, I guess kind of just like a barrier for me. So I don't get as emotional as like as a normal person would. So there's been times we've had like phone calls and like he sounds terrible. He's in the hospital and he's just telling me like everything that needs to be taken care of once he's gone, and where I can find certain things that he has stashed away, and all that extraness that you have to deal with. But comes August 2020, I go down to Jersey for a friend's bridal shower, and he's like tremendously sick, and he has a girlfriend at the time, and she's living in the apartment with him. And I just see him. I'm like, "You look terrible. Like, why don't you go to the hospital?" He doesn't want to go to the hospital, so I basically force him to go to the hospital, pick him up, put him in the car, take him to the hospital, drop him off there. It's COVID time now, so I can't even be there with him. So me and my wife, we leave and we go to the bridal shower that we need to go to. So come back, he's still in the hospital for a few days. Me and her leave to go back home to Boston. So I'm still talking to him. The following week, he's not feeling well again. Just like the health is just it's just deteriorating. Um, and his kidney is just like failing. It's not working, not doing what it needs to do. So then I come back down to Jersey. Then again, so actually, sorry, I'm all over the place. Backtrack a little bit. He was at the hospital. They wanted him to stay there for a few more days, but he didn't want to stay at the hospital. So he literally checked himself out. And he was going against the doctor's orders, going against the nurse's orders. He's very stubborn. That's probably where I get a lot of my stubbornness from. So he checks himself out of the hospital and he goes home, but he's still not doing like what he needs to do to take care of his health. So I come back down the following week and I'm basically arguing with him, like trying to get him to go back. And at this point, he knows that he needs to go back. And I will never forget, he's like, "I don't want to go back." I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "Because they're going to laugh at me because they told me not to leave and I left anyway." So he was like worried about what they were thinking. And I'm like, "They're not going to be worried about that. Just get up and go." So drop him off at the hospital. This is like the last time that I actually see him. And I don't like me, obviously not knowing that this is going to be my last time. I'm like, all right, he's going to go to the hospital and be fine. So I drop him off. I'm actually able to go into his room this time. And we're just talking, having normal conversation. And then I was literally about to drive back 5 hours back home. And I just said bye. And we dapped each other up. I couldn't give him a hug because he was like hooked up to the machine, and everything. So um, I just remember just giving him like a little handshake and me walking out and thinking like, it popped in my brain like this could be the last time. But I'm like, no, I've had this thought multiple times and it hasn't been the last time. So this is going to be the same. So I eventually get back home a few days later. Like I'm talking to him, talking to the doctors, and they're saying that he should be fine. There shouldn't be anything to worry about. And then like the next day, all of a sudden, his health just took a turn for the worse. And I have my older sister, she's down in that area. So she actually goes to the hospital and she's there with him. And then he eventually passes away. And she calls me and lets me know that she's literally on the phone and she's like, yeah, they're trying everything they do, like pumping his chest, giving him CPR, trying to save his life. But they were trying to do that for like 30 minutes to an hour. And obviously he didn't come back. So she calls me, lets me know that. And it's kind of weird because just like I didn't know how to process it. I'm like, I've had this thought like happening in my mind for like years on end, and it's finally here. So I'm just like, okay, like I kind of take it as like it is what it is mentality, and then go to sleep that night, wake up the next day, drive down to Jersey, and just start handling everything that we need to handle. But yeah, that was recent, September of 2020, so still fairly new.
Thank you so much, Jared, for sharing this. And with it being so recent, I think that's very helpful to those who are grieving currently in these recent losses to hear from someone who's had a recent experience. I'm curious, what does your grief look like today versus September? Even though that was so recent, I wonder for someone who lost someone, let's say last week, what they can expect a few months down the road. Different for everyone, but how are you feeling today versus then?
So to me, I feel like it's kind of the same. I mean, I still think about them every now and then, but for me, there was like there were no tears shed, and
Really?
yeah, and I kind of think that's a little bit weird myself. I'm like, well, why haven't I cried yet? So I'm like, is it eventually going to come, or am I just past that now? But I don't know. Like I said, I've had this thought of him passing away for like years on end already. So I think I kind of prep myself for that. And I think I kind of do that as like a mechanism to, I don't want to say suppress my feelings, but I don't know, just to, I guess, make me feel better. I'm not really sure.
Thanks for your honesty there. Yeah, I do wonder. I mean, everyone is so different in how they process these things. So I think, whether you cry or not, there's no right or wrong, but just like you're saying, like being curious about it, I think is interesting. Like, I'm feeling this or I'm not feeling this. I'm curious about it. I have a question for both of you. You're both in relationships, you're married. I'm in a serious relationship as well. I wonder, what advice might you have for someone who is the spouse of a grieving person? And this could be taken from an example as something your spouse did that was particularly helpful, or it can be something you wish that they did. You don't even have to say which one, but any advices for the spouse of someone grieving the loss of their parent?
This is like a very, this is so funny that you bring this up because I feel like with my spouse, there is a lot of, it's not even tension. There's just a lot that, and it's not that I don't feel comfortable talking to him about it or anything like that. But for him, obviously he didn't know my dad. So there is like a hesitancy to say like, I don't know, to just like talk about him because I know he can't like put that to a memory the way that I can. So I feel like to me, I'm like, oh, he doesn't understand like how funny this would actually be or like stuff like that. So there's like a little bit of that, which is like all me, myself. Like he's never been like, I stopped telling him this stuff. But there's also a little bit of like, I say this to him all the time too, but I feel like he hasn't lost anyone significant, which isn't totally true. Like one of his friends, like in their friend group passed away a couple of years ago, but it wasn't like a super close friend, but I mean like in his family, like he is 30 with 3 living grandparents, like, which I feel like is anomaly. And yeah, whereas I've lost like 3 grandparents and a cousin and my dad, and I feel like I've had so much loss. So sometimes I get super defensive and like totally shut down because I'm like, you don't get it. Like you've never lost anyone, you've never grieved anything. And sometimes I just want to like be miserable. And he's like a very not miserable person. He's like, everything is beautiful. The birds are chirping. It's a beautiful day to be alive.
We love.
We love that.
Yes.
And just some days, like my grief, which I'm noticing now is grief. I didn't really know what it was before, but some days I just am miserable. And so I don't know. I think like, and I also think there's a little bit of fear for him to even like ask because he knows like I do get emotional more recently when I talk about it. Whereas when we first met, I would talk about my dad all the time and not get emotional. I was 22. So like I don't know, maybe I was like calloused, but now I'll like go into something and just like start crying because I love crying now. Anyways, I say all that to say, I think there's some fear for him because he like doesn't want to like bring something up that would make me upset. I think like my biggest advice would just be to like let your spouse just like be in or sit in whatever the grief looks like for them, which is different for everybody. And I know for my dad, like when he lost his mom, he processes grief by sleeping. Like I just remember this man slept like I for days was like asking my mom if he's gonna get out of bed. And she was like, he's just really tired. Like, and it was just dark sleep, like not watching TV crying, like snoring for hours and hours. I was like, who can sleep this much? But it was like his grief, I think. So however it shows up for the person, my advice would just be to offer like, do you need anything from me? And instead of assuming what you think they need, just like asking, like, do you need anything? If so, like, what is it? Do you need me to just not talk to you for 6 hours? Like, great. And like not take it personal at all. Not that my spouse does, but I just know that that's a thing for other people. So that would be my main point of advice. But it's something that me and my spouse are working through. And it's like a fear that I have because since we've been together, he hasn't like lost anybody in his family. So like, I don't even know what his grieving process looks like. So I have like a little bit of fear of like when that happens, like how he's going to react. What do I do? Because I've literally never seen this man shed a tear in the 7 years we've been together. So that's like another thing that I feel like we still are working through, but I would just say it's a process, and open and honest communication is like the key in my mind.
Yeah, I was gonna say try to give them the space that they need. Like some people like to be left alone and like to grieve by themselves and grieve just the way that they grieve. I could see some people like trying to force their presence or force themselves on a grieving person just to let it be known that they're there. But you just saying that you're there for the person and showing them and allowing them the space and time that they need, I think that's the best that you can do. Also, like say if the person is like has other responsibilities that they can't actually get to right now, maybe you taking on some of those responsibilities and maybe trying to get their mind off of it by, I don't know, taking them to a happy place that you know they like, or just something fun that you know they like to do, that maybe it might be able to bring some joy out of them. But I guess the main advice would be just giving them their space, allowing them to grieve, and if they want to be left alone, let them be left alone.
Thank you both. I really appreciate these perspectives, and I think, yeah, it's just helpful to hear this, and especially if someone is out there, they're like, I don't know, my partner did lose someone, we haven't talked about it. There's not a right or wrong way to do it, but even just hearing about what you guys have been through with it is very helpful. So thank you. Follow-up question, Jared. I wonder, how do you feel that the loss of your father might affect your own journey into fatherhood as you start that later this year? Is that something that you think about?
No, it actually hasn't been something I've thought about. Well, I guess it has been because I mean, obviously, I wanted my child to meet my dad. Obviously, even me growing up, I never really remember. I don't remember me having a grandfather. He was already passed away, and I think we had actually on our podcast we had a an episode on generational curses, and I said I don't really think it's a generational curse, but I want to break the cycle of there not being a grandfather there in the presence of a child. And I've seen that happen in my family and in my life. And I mean, I feel like I really don't have control of that because control of over that because I don't know like when I'm leaving this earth. But I do have some sort of control, I think, that I can try my best to be in the life of my grandchild whenever my daughter has a baby, whenever that might be. But yeah, just the thought of him not being able to meet her, and especially like with my wife getting pregnant just basically a few months after he passed away. So it was like we were close. And I know that he always like mentioned that to me, like, oh, I need to see a grandchild before I leave this earth. And just the fact that that's not going to be able to happen for me, it weighs on me a little bit. But I mean, like I said, I look at it, it is what it is. So just got to keep pushing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Jared's favorite line. It is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is, baby. Keep it pushing. I know there's so many like amazing metaphors and yet awkward metaphors. You just keep going, keep on tooting the. I don't know. Thank you though. That's helpful to hear for other people who are expecting. So thank you so much. My next question for you guys. I think I have a few more. I mean, I have like 70,000 more, but I'll pick a few. If you are open to sharing, what might either of you want other people to know about grief in the Black community?
That is a phenomenal question. In my experience specifically, obviously, we don't speak for all Black people, but in my experience, especially with Black mothers, I feel like there is this need to be the strongest person in the family, the strength, the backbone, the matriarch. It's not even a need. It's like what they do. And I know with my mom, like part of the reason I think I'm not really processing my feelings until right now is because, I saw my dad cry more than I saw my mom cry. So, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen my mom cry. Actually, I did for the first time the other day when we were talking about this exact subject. But I say that to say, like, there's this idea of like strength and praying through pain, and that I feel like is perpetuated in our culture as opposed to like acknowledging that these emotions are real, that we can process these emotions, we can cry together, we can do all these things. There's like this notion in my experience of like moving on, kind of similar to what Jared's alluding to. And I think that's something that's learned. I think that's what I witnessed in my family for a long time. And I don't know. I wish that would change. And the Black community specifically faces a lot of loss and loss of children and loss of just people. And I don't know. It's
family members, friends.
yeah. And to so many different things, right? Whether it's like society or personal or black on black crime, who knows what it could be, or if it's losing a child to the prison system, like that's a whole nother type of grief. And I think I would just love to see our community just be comfortable talking in general, talking about emotions, whether it's about grief, whether it's about anxiety, whether it's about mental health. I feel like there's just a huge stigma on this idea of like, as Black people, we have to go above and beyond what maybe a white person would have to do to be successful. So there is no time for this. There is no time for emotions. There is no time for feeling sorry for yourself. Like that's something I've actually heard before from a family member. Like we got to pick it up and like keep it pushing and keep it moving. So
it is what it is.
Literally, it is what it is. So that's like something I would like to see differently, or something that I hope to change for my future children, is just acknowledging emotions, being okay with them, talking about them, and that type of stuff.
Yeah, like you said, I do think it does tie into mental health in the Black community. I mean, it's looked at as taboo and stigmatized. And just talking about your emotions really isn't a thing that Black individuals do. I think the new generations, our generation, Gen Z, they're starting to change that path. So I think it's like the path is going up. It's on for the better. But grieving wise, I think that's really the only time I see Black people really cry, is if they lost somebody. And that's the only time that I think, me personally, that the Black community allows people to cry. Any other times they try to tell you to suck it up, man up, or stop being too soft, stop being sensitive, unless it's somebody you lost. And even I've seen cases where people have lost people close to them and they shed a tear, and people still have been like talking down on them in a condescending way that they're grieving and they're shedding tears and showing their emotions. But I just think it's transparency, openness. Like we have to be vulnerable. We have to share our emotions, and we can't suppress them. And I think, like I said, I think the generations, our generation and the Generation Z, they're being more open. They're talking more about it, and it's just allowing more openness for us all to be better.
Thank you both. I really appreciate this perspective, and it's so helpful to hear. So I appreciate both of you opening up about this. Since this is the Dying of Laughter podcast, is there a comedic moment that has surrounded your grief experience? If not comedic, perhaps bizarre or uncomfortable, or something just so X, Y, or Z you had to laugh. If not, that is also okay.
Yeah, so after my dad passed, I had to go back to Philly and like clean out his apartment. And for some reason, he had like all of these sort of like helmets, like these medieval time helmets and masks. And I'm like, my mom was there with me, and it was actually funny. My mom and like one of my aunts were there, and they were like, what type of freaky ish was he into? And it was just hilarious. And I knew that it wasn't used for that. It wasn't used for like anything like sexual or anything, but for them just to say that, it was, at the moment, it was hilarious.
I love that image. Thank you for sure. Exactly. There's always something, right? Where you're just like, I don't know.
It was very weird. I was like, what is this? What is he doing?
That's amazing. What about you, Asia?
I have like kind of several, but the one that sticks out to me because, and I don't even know if it will be as funny to you guys because you have to kind of know the person who was involved. But one of my teammates and really good friends, Tori, she is like 6'2". She's actually deaf and plays basketball, which is like its own amazing thing. Like was in the Deaf Olympics, like amazing athlete.
And she's a beast.
Incredible. Yeah.
but like 90% deaf. And at my dad's funeral services, my entire basketball team came from college. Obviously, they all came together, walked in like a bunch of tall people, and the church was really big. And as Jared said, it was like packed to capacity. I mean, people were showing up that we didn't even know. It was just a beautiful thing because we were like, wow, this man touched like a lot of people's lives. But like, I mean, people showing up that we were like, I mean, people in the army, the Navy, like I've never seen before. So the church is like standing room only. And my team is sitting like up on this like elevated part of the seating area, and they're taking up the whole thing because between the 12 players and the coaches, it was like a 20-person area. And at the time, they were like my solace. They were my friends. So I kept looking back at them and checking to see if they were there. So literally years later, I was with them talking about something, and my dad came up somehow, and the funeral service came up somehow, and they were like, oh yeah, like they were joking, like, oh yeah, like remember when Tori like threw up in the church or whatever? And I was like, what are you guys talking about? Like I'd never heard this story before. And this was like 3 years later, and they were like, we've never told you this. And I was like, no. And they were like, maybe we didn't tell you because, it was your dad's funeral and we felt bad. But the morning of the services, they had to be at the parking lot at a certain time because my coaches were taking everybody in a van to the funeral. And so they went to the calf to get food, I guess. And I guess that maybe they were having lunch because the funeral services were in the afternoon, and Tori had like clam chowder for lunch or something. And in the church, like they had these really steep, small stairs. And as she's going up the stairs to go sit in that area where they sat, she literally vomits clam chowder all over the church steps. And the
Which
people
already looks like vomit before you eat it.
right. But the people in the church are like looking at her like, are you effing kidding me? Now we have to clean up this entire the church is packed at this point. They were the last to get there.
It was like a million people. Let's say it was like a million people. It was crazy.
Now the stairs are blocked off because Tori has thrown up clam chowder all over the place. And I didn't hear the story till years later. And I couldn't stop laughing because that was like that day, the funeral was, I think I blacked out. I have like pockets of memories of people who were there, but the day as a whole, I don't really remember. And the night before we had the private viewing, which I was like vomiting myself and like doing all this physically dramatic stuff. So I don't remember that day. And so to have this idea in my mind of Tori like vomiting on the stairs, it makes me laugh every single time. And I know my dad, who loved her, was probably dying laughing as well. So that's just like one funny story that I can think of. But
dying of laughter, that's what we do here. Shout out to Tori and her vom. Yeah, clam chowder baby. And I love that you didn't know till years later. That's epic.
But the sad thing is Tori will never listen to this because she's not really a podcaster because of the deaf thing. She's like, I don't like podcasts. I need subtitles, which is like makes me sad. But
oh my goodness, that's such a good point. That's such a point of inaccessibility for people who can't hear. What is the solution for that? Is there a way that podcasts can have subtitles? Maybe if it was replayed on YouTube or something.
We upload to YouTube and then YouTube can like automatically do the subtitles, but we don't get a lot of plays from YouTube's, but it's there if anybody.
Okay.
They have the option.
That's good to point. That's good to know. That's such a good point. Oh, I mean, yeah, you're like but you can tell Tori that you talked about her on this.
I will.
Amazing. Well, before we wrap up here, I'm wondering, do either of you have a book, podcast, film, or resource that has helped you with your grief, either recently or at the time of the loss?
This podcast has helped me recently. So
thank you. Oh, that's so nice.
Small
Thank
plug.
You so much. Yeah.
No, you know what though? A book, a podcast, or a resource. I mean, my biggest resource is and still and was like family and community. Also, I feel like a resource for me, which I claim that I'm going to write a book at some point in my life. But sometimes when I think of like
Jared
memories, when I think of memories or I'm sad or something, like I'll just write it all down, classic journal style. That's what I claim I'm going to make into a compilation of stories. But yeah, that has been really helpful for me of just like when it comes up, just dealing with it at the moment. And I think like the other thing I'll just add to that is that grief really just has no timeline. Like I said, I'm dealing with so many things now. You would have thought like I was in Jared's shoes, like happened September 2020. At least that's how it feels, which it hasn't felt that way in a long time. I don't know if it's because we're coming up on 10-year anniversary next year or like what the situation is,
That's
but
crazy.
so crazy. And that's to me, like I just want to say like that is completely normal. Like there are definitely still days where I break down or I'm just like nonstop thinking about my dad all freaking day. And then I'm like, are you here? Are you around me? Like, I don't know. I do feel like he shows up. So that's helpful for me too. And I would just encourage people to be open to that. Like, I think our loved ones are with us all the time and sending us signs all the time. We're just like not paying attention to see them. So having that openness and like awareness has been really helpful for me too, because I notice stuff all the time now that I'm like, for sure. Like, I know that's definitely you. So that's my advice.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much. I love hearing that. It's a good reminder. I forget too. And I think once you do hit those 10 years, you know, we're again on similar timelines. Sometimes I feel like I'm grieving the loss of not sitting in grief. Like sometimes when I'm good, I feel like shame around that. And then sometimes when I'm really not good, I'm like, wait, but I was good for like a year. How am I not good again? That's bizarre. So it's the uneven, you know, chart of going up, down, up, down, up, down. And then up, 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 and then down, down, down. Okay, now I'm just describing shapes. Jared, what about you?
I would say Chelsea London Lloyd. You. I've literally only talked about this twice, and both times have been with you. So
Yes. Can I add that? Like, you didn't. So I was a little upset because you asked Jared if he wanted to ask me any questions, but I didn't get to ask Jared any questions about his story.
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I totally forgot. Can we please do that now? Thank you for reminding.
Well, the only
Please.
reason I bring it up is because of exactly what Jared said. Like, he literally never talks about this. So, like, grateful for this podcast because he had to. Also, I'm very proud of him. So, acknowledgement for you talking about this, Jared, because you never do. I don't really have a question. I just like was going to acknowledge that and be grateful for it because it's so
I'll
weird.
talk.
Well, it's so weird, Jared, because we talk all the time. Obviously, we're really good friends, but in college, like his mom was always coming, always coming, always coming. Like I didn't see his dad that much. And then like even after college, obviously he was raised by his mother. So that's like who I hear about the most. And so in our 10-year friendship, like I didn't hear about his dad that much. So, you know, when he lost his dad as like a friend and someone else who lost their dad, I was kind of like, I literally like, this is going to sound so weird, Jared. I've never said this, but I like didn't know. I guess I really didn't know how close you guys were until you just shared this entire story. Like I kind of had this idea in my mind that you guys were not that close, or maybe he was like in and out because he talked about his mom so much in our friendship, but not his dad that much. So anyways, I just had to get that off my chest.
My friends from back home think the same thing. Because I don't just like, you know me, Asia can vouch for this, but I don't really speak on my emotions or life really like that unless I'm asked.
Literally.
And a lot of people never ask me, so I'm not just going to go randomly just shell out that information.
Well, now I feel like we need to do our own whole episode, maybe bring Chelsea back to help us, you know, navigate our grief, and we can ask each other questions because I learned so much from just that simple question Chelsea asked you, and like we talk every single day. So now I just feel like a bad friend.
No, it's not your fault at all. I just don't share. I don't share that.
No, hey, I'm glad to witness, you know, this journey of you guys learning about each other. And I think, I mean, it is relatable. There's certain topics within all friendship dynamics and partners and parents and all relationships where if you haven't really talked about it before, it's kind of like, when should we? And even if one of the people is really open and communicative, or both are open and communicative, it's kind of just like, well, we haven't really. So our friendship is kind of about this other thing. And like you guys have all these college experiences and you're doing a podcast together. You have a business relationship. Like now you're having a child. There's so many things. It's like, when is it a good time to really get into these details? Thank you again, Asia, for the reminder that you totally should have had the floor to ask him something. I've forgotten, so thank you. And Jared, I'm wondering, as someone who's not necessarily sharing as much, like what was it like for you to open up today. How did it feel? Were you like, this is cool, this is exhausting, craziness? How do you feel?
I mean, it felt fine. I wasn't like too worried about it. I'm happy that I did share. I don't want to be like Mr. Incognito or Mr. Mystery Man, but I mean, yeah, it's cool. I appreciate the questions. It's the questions that you asked that make me want to divulge that information. So I just don't do it just randomly, you know what I mean? So if you ask great questions like you did, then the information will come.
Love that. And hey, the offer stands now in the future, whenever, to talk about this more offline on all the things, and also have, resources that are not necessarily for everyone, but I do feel like I have some plugs to like certain books that I think are better than others, or like certain online situations, events. So anyways, happy to chat whenever about that in the future. And Asia, what was it like for you opening up today as well? I know you have shared, but it's still, going through all these things. So what was your experience?
Totally positive. This has been an amazing interview and appreciative. I think like what Jared just said kind of, it hit me in a different way. Like Jared just said, if I'm asked, like I don't mind sharing. And I sometimes but like his first thought wouldn't be to come out and share, but I think like for me, I don't talk about my dad all the time because in my mind I'm like, nobody wants to hear me talk about this dead person. Do they care? Like I'm the only one who cares about this. So I think it's really cool that you do this podcast, because I think a lot of people who grieve like want to be asked about their loved ones. And it's never, like you said, never the right setting, never the right time. Like, don't want to bring it up.
And it could be awkward,
Yes.
difficult conversation.
But it's like for the person, like very relieving to be like, yeah, I could talk about this all day. Like this episode could be 3 hours long if we wanted it to be, because once you get going, you feel like, oh my gosh, somebody wants to know about my dad. Like I'd love to tell you every piece of his personality. And so I think it's really cool. And I appreciate you for this platform, because I think people who grieve like want to be asked about their loved ones, because that's how we remember them. It's like that movie Coco. That's my recommendation. The Disney movie Coco, where they talk about how your loved ones are only leave you if you don't like talk about them and keep them alive. So
I gotta hit Disney Plus for that one.
You gotta get on. I get that.
You're about to dad to be. Disney Plus is gonna be your new BFF, Disney Junior, all that good stuff.
Nothing but animated movies and shows.
Coco is such a good movie. I'm glad you brought that up. Have you guys seen The Mitchells Against the Machine? Speaking of animated movies,
I have not.
It is so good.
Is that new on Disney Plus?
It's new. It's on Netflix. I think it's not Disney, but it's Is it Pixar? I don't even know who it is.
No, I saw it on Netflix. You're right. I scrolled past it. Was it good? Did you watch it?
It is okay. Whether you like animated films or not, I mean, I really like them, but this one, the humor is, the humor slaps. Like the jokes are so uniquely like they're meant for adults. Like I'm like I feel very adult. I'm like, oh, these are the jokes that are meant for like over 25. I don't know. It's really good if you are into that or not. Recommend.
Totally.
Don't know where I'm going with this. No one dies. There's a funny dad in it. Are we triggered? I don't know. Okay. Last but not least, Asia, what is your dad's name?
Bill Ewing. They called him Dollar Bill. Many nicknames. Still Bill, all the things. Yeah, he was a really cool person, touched a lot of people's lives, which I learned at this packed house funeral. And still to this day, like I'll quickly just share one other thing. I recently got a new job, and the person at the job, the person I was interviewing with, who's like one of the executives, went to the same high school as my dad, but they were different age, like 10 years apart. But I still I reached out and was like, hey, I noticed you went to the same high school as my dad. He played basketball there, and his team like won all this stuff. So they got inducted into his high school Hall of Fame. And
amazing.
He responded and was like, I was like, I'm not sure if you knew him. He was older than you, but like would love to talk all things Cambridge. That's where they're from. And the executive who I now work for responded and was like, oh my God, this is insane. Like your dad was my freshman and JV basketball coach. Like he made me love basketball. Like he was a very influential, informative person in my life. And I just like can't even go. And so like stuff like that literally happens all the time, Chelsea. Like I look a lot like him. I've been stopped like at Celtics games and someone has asked me like, are you Bill Ewing's daughter? You look exactly like him. Like I loved him. Strangers all the time stop me on the street. So those are moments where I'm like, okay, I know you're around. Like, I know you put this person here. And that one with the job literally happened like last month. So just want to end with that because I want to emphasize that like these people are still right next to you, literally.
Oh, I have chills about the fact that he was the coach. Oh my goodness.
I didn't even know my dad coached freshman in high school basketball. Like didn't know he did that at all in his life. And now this guy's like, yeah, he was my coach. He literally is the reason I'm in love with the game. Like he's like, I cannot believe you're his child. I'm like, hi, I'm here. So all the time.
That is amazing. I have chills. Oh my gosh. I'm happy we're ending there. Jared, what was your dad's name?
Odell. My middle name.
Odell. Oh, it's your middle name. That's wonderful.
Yep. Odell Gaines. Trenton, New Jersey.
Love that. Well, I'm glad we could honor Bill and Odell today. Shout out to Lloyd. Also, I changed my last name to Lloyd. So people are like, wait, was his name Lloyd? Lloyd? That's crazy. I'm like, no. I changed it back in the day.
That's so cool.
Thank you. It is. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like, it's weird. My childhood people know me as something else, but then everyone in my adulthood knows me as that. So beautiful little full circle moment. Now that we're wrapping up here, where can people connect with you online and listen to your podcast? If you don't mind explaining what you guys do on your pod and also shouting out your personal handles, if you'd like to include those as well.
Sure. So our podcast is called Done with Adulting. It's exactly what it sounds like. We talk about all the things that we have to do as adults that nobody ever taught us, even though we went to school for literally 100 years. We talk about current events as well. We talk about generational differences and just all really types of fun stuff. We're just here to relate with you all. And we can be found on really any where you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts at, that's where we are.
Yeah. And all the socials, Done with Adulting Pod on Instagram, Done WTH Adulting on Twitter. So make sure you give us a follow.
We'll give you our personal handles if you want to put them in the show notes. We'll add those there.
Perfect.